and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake LaMore, and when this episode drops, it will be Women's History Month in March of 2024. And one of the women in Kankakee County history that I've been wanting to sit down with since we started Kankakee Podcast was the very first woman to be elected mayor of Kankakee, and that is Nina Epstein. Welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And it's hard to believe it's already been, it's not been quite, it's 6 years. 6 years. I was going to say, it's not 8 quite yet.
No, 6 years.
It feels like a lifetime ago already, though.
It does. It feels like it was another lifetime.
Yeah. Before we get to your time as, being the first woman elected mayor in the city of Kankakee, I just want to learn about you and where life starts. Are you native to the area?
Born and raised in Kankakee. My dad had a poultry store on West Court Street. So my brothers, I have 2 brothers. We went to Kankakee School District schools. Graduated and went on to college at U of I, where I met my husband. But no, my parents are native. My grandparents were immigrants from Greece, and they settled here because there were family here. And so we have, the traditional immigrant experience. They were Greek Orthodox and typically settled by the church that's still on Washington Avenue.
Did they have anything to do with the formation of that church, or was it already
No, the church
formed?
Was already here.
Okay.
When they arrived.
Okay.
So,
would that have been, because that was built in the 20s?
Well, I was born in 47.
Okay.
My grandparents were obviously here already, so they probably came here in the early 1900s. And then after I went off to college, I met my husband, and we shockingly came back to Kankakee. He's a dentist, or he's retired, and wanted to find an associateship. And a good friend of mine, her dentist, needed an associate. So we came back to Kankakee. He's from the East Coast and wanted nothing to do with the East Coast.
Okay.
And was happy to live in a small town. And I didn't have an issue with that. It's just when you think about your future, I just really hadn't thought that we would come back to Kankakee. I'm happy we did.
Yeah. So when were you in Champaign at the time, or were you on the East Coast?
On the East Coast in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
That's where he went to dental school.
Okay. So you were out there, and what were you doing? Were you teaching or?
No, I worked for an insurance company.
Okay.
My husband, we were married in August, and he gave me 3 weeks to find a job.
3 weeks or you're out.
Yeah, 3 weeks because we had no money. And so I interviewed and found a job at an insurance company, and I made $5,120 a year. I don't know why that number sticks, but it does.
I think it's just because it was your first job out of college,
It was my first job,
right?
And you think about that today, and you think that's not even possible.
No.
And we put money, my husband's a very budget person. We put money in envelopes every month.
Okay.
And so the big surprise was if there was anything left in any of the envelopes at the end of the month. So, we all start out. You have a beginning.
Right.
But people, when they see you as you're more established, don't know the backstory.
Right. Yeah. And that's why you're here.
Yeah.
What's your maiden name?
My
then?
maiden name is Lorand. It was changed when my grandparents came through Ellis Island on both sides. Greek names are very long.
And they're difficult to pronounce.
Yes. And so many families of any ethnicity, their names got changed. And so my father's side, that was the change that they made to their name.
It doesn't even sound Greek.
No.
Usually I feel like they aim...
Nicopolis, Stephanopoulos, it's always something much longer.
Yes.
And my grandparents on my mother's side, their name was changed to Dades, Dades, which is vanilla, as you can probably.
Very vanilla. It's like Smith almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm assuming they did not have a say in their name change. It was just like, okay, this is going to be your name.
You were just happy that you were healthy and well enough to get accepted to come into the country.
Right. So growing up in the Greek Orthodox community then in Kankakee, what was that like? I mean, we've touched on that a little bit here on the podcast. We've had a couple other people from the community, but I would be curious to know what your take was on it. My grandparents on my mother's side lived here. My father's parents had passed.
So we were very close and very religious. Went to Sunday school, went to Greek school to learn the language, went to church. Were very involved in the community. My father sort of broke away a bit because everyone lived by the church and he wanted better, and so we moved to Riverview in Kankakee. And that's where I was raised for more than 50 years.
Okay. And so you come back you're in Washington, D.C. with your husband, and you come back to Kankakee. Your husband becomes an associate at a dental practice.
Right.
What was Kankakee like at that time? Approximately when was that?
It was 1972. Kankakee was in the middle of some racial unrest at that time. I found it, we lived in Washington. It's so funny how you don't expect that of your hometown. We lived in a small apartment by Olivet, and after a year or so had saved enough money to buy a house. And we bought a house on Justine Drive, a small ranch house. And I can remember the realtor saying, "You don't want to live here. I can get you like a lot, or you can buy a house in Briarcliff." Briarcliff was very new at that time. And I sort of looked at him and like, why would I want to do that? I'd grown up in the 6th Ward. Justine's in the 6th Ward. That was my home. And so that was the first instance of sort of steering people away from the city of Kankakee. And it stuck with me for a long time. And it was a factor when I worked for the school district as well.
And when you came back to Kankakee in 1972, is that when you started working for the school district?
No, my husband was working. I didn't work for about a year or so. Then I started substitute teaching because I helped my husband in his practice, so it gave me some flexibility. And that lasted for a while. We had our daughter after we moved here, and that gave me time with her. And so that sort of was a very calm part of our lives. And then my husband had a stroke when he was in his early 40s.
Wow.
And had to give up his practice. So that was a very difficult time. And we decided that we could not live together from the age of 40 on, retired.
You weren't expecting it to be that early, right?
No. And at that time, a job became available in the district. And I applied for the public relations position, community relations, it was called. Okay. And that's when I started working full-time for the school district. So, you never know. Your life is like a pinball machine. You just never know where it's going to ping.
I think that's a better way to describe it than the whole box of chocolates thing from Forrest Gump.
Yeah, no, it wasn't chocolate.
It makes it sound a little more pleasant, but it really is like playing really, pinball.
When you get to be a certain age, you look back and you think of some of the defining moments or things that made you make decisions that you never thought. that was a very defining moment, as is any illness in any family. We didn't experience anything that a lot of families don't experience.
Yeah.
We were fortunate financially. My husband I'm going to do a plug for disability insurance because none of our friends had it. We did. And
you had it before this even happened?
Well, being a dentist, I have to give a shout out to the Illinois State Dental Society. When you go to dental school, my husband always has said, you learn how to do dentistry, but you don't know the business end.
I've heard that many times.
Of a practice.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of lawyers, doctors, really anyone.
Yes.
And so they have a wonderful orientation that they do with new dentists. Like, here are insurances that you should get. Now, you don't have to, but at least you're apprised of what you should do. And we always say, it was just dumb luck. It's not like we were so smart. We just thought, well, okay, we'll do that. We'll do practice interruption insurance. You do all these things. You don't want to spend the money.
No, because that is
because you
so
really
expensive.
don't have a lot of money at that time.
No.
But we did not have money, but we did make those decisions.
Yeah.
And who would have thought that you would have needed that?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I speak to, I'm always asked to speak to women in business. I always do a shout out that you really need to protect your family as best you can, because you just don't know what life is going to offer. It's altering. It's life altering. That if you have, on top of illness, then you have major financial issues as well. And so that's my shout out. And so I started working full time and I loved it. I worked there for almost 16 years.
And that was, I just realized we didn't even talk about what you went to college for.
I was an English major. I started out as an art major because I did love design. Quickly realized I didn't have the talent.
So, what led you to even doing art? Did you do any type of form of art as a kid? Or
in high school, I had wonderful art teachers, and I just thought that would be something I would be interested in. It just wasn't I wasn't good at it.
Yeah, and
I did like color and design, which really helped me at the school district because I designed all their publications. So I could use it, but I was an English major.
Okay.
And so that's what I graduated with.
So you started working at Kankakee School District 111. Was that late 70s, early 80s at that point? Or it probably would have been the 80s, right?
Let's see.
Or was it
my
later
husband,
than that?
I'm going backwards.
Yeah.
Probably early 90s. Early 90s.
Okay.
I started working there full time.
Okay. And so during this time working for the school district in public relations, you mentioned you were doing their publications and things like that. That's probably back in the time where you're physically mailing newsletters and things like that.
I would go to all the board meetings and I would do a publication called Board Briefs. And so I would do like synopsis of the board meetings and mail them out to the media, parents, Chamber of Commerce, realtors, anyone. And it was a physical mailing. It was also on the website. We did calendars. I did brochures. I did the magnet program that we still have in the district. So it was very design-centered and very in-your-hand type of things, which I still to this day miss.
Oh, yeah.
Because I always think not everyone is on Facebook. Not everyone, that was a critique I had I'm on a foundation board for Riverside, and they did a newsletter. And I said, you really need to mail it to certain constituents because not a lot of people my age are not on Facebook. I have a Facebook account, but a lot of people I know aren't.
Yes.
And so and realtors, they go to a website, but we always would have packets that would mail out to prospective homeowners about the district. People like something in their hands they can refer to. So it was a great job. I loved it.
When did your role in government come into play? Did you, during that time, were you on any type of boards of any kind for organizations or government bodies?
Not for government. Okay. I was on the foundation board for St. Mary's Hospital. I did, volunteer type of things. I had never been to a city council meeting. I was always voted. We were brought up to always vote. I had no interest in politics.
So you were just kind of doing that. You would vote, but you wouldn't really necessarily go much outside of that.
Absolutely not. And one night, and I relay this story, I remember it so distinctly because it was so out of my wheelhouse. I was making dinner, and a friend of mine, Joanne Schwade, she was an alder person for the 2nd Ward, and she called me at home and said, Tom Huntington, who is a judge, was the 6th Ward alderman, and he was retiring, and would I run for that office? She might as well have said, there's a spaceship leaving tomorrow. And there's a seat, would you like to?
There's a seat on the spaceship.
Yeah. And I said, I can't even wrap my head around it. And I said, why? And she said, well, you've lived in the 6th Ward your whole life. And I worked for the district, so I knew a lot about the community. And they thought that I would be a good candidate. So I went and I said I would think about it. I spoke to the mayor, that was Mayor Green. I spoke to Dennis Barron, he was the other alderman, and said, what are the obligations, time-wise? And
this would have been what year?
I was an alder person for 8 years, mayor for 8 years. We're 6 years out. So somebody somebody do the math in the control room.
Yeah.
And so I said I would do it. Right off the bat, I had a primary opponent. I'm like, you've got to be kidding, but I did have incredible support and learned how to, with a lot of help, how to run a campaign, and won that seat and then was reelected again. So I had lots of experience on the council before becoming mayor, but then Mayor Green decided to retire. And I was on a committee to find someone to run in his place. And people said, would you do it? And I said, no. It had never crossed my mind.
Yeah, well, and I mean, what was your time like as an alderwoman? I
enjoyed it. I loved to read. So I made sure I was very knowledgeable about what we were voting on.
You would read those ordinances and resolutions, and that is, that is hard work. You talk about trying not to fall asleep.
And let me tell you, that served me well later on. But I enjoyed the process. I was on committees, public safety, CDA. I enjoyed it. It wasn't a real controversial time. We did a lot of good stuff that was happening. It seemed to be a congenial group.
We were just kind of talking about that before we started.
There were Democrats, Republicans, African Americans. We all seemed to get along. I'm not saying that we didn't have disagreements, but I thought we were a pretty cohesive group. So I found the experience to be fine, good. And so when they asked me to run, we were in the executive center. And when I said no, I remember leaving saying, I'm so proud of you. I'm saying this to myself.
that you decided not to run for mayor.
That I said no. I was really proud. And then time went on and they asked me again. And once again, I had this resolve that I said, no, thank you.
Why did you keep saying no?
Because I had never envisioned doing that. It just wasn't something, a lot of people, or many, that's their goal. Oh, I want to be a senator. I want to be a representative. I want to be mayor. That's part of their DNA. It's, what they strive for. It wasn't part of mine.
Do you think that's why they wanted you in that seat? I mean, even as an alderwoman, maybe that's why they wanted you as an alderwoman. Maybe that's why they wanted you as mayor, because you necessarily had a different perspective. You weren't there to...
I always said I wasn't a politician. And people say to me, well, that's a pretty funny statement considering
it is a funny statement.
You're in politics.
Right.
But it was the politics I hated or disliked.
The typical politics.
The typical politics. To me, it's a job, and it's a very important job, and you need to do it well. I didn't like the other noise of it. And so finally, I talked to my family, and my daughter said, why not? Like, what is your issue here? And she said, go for it. And it was probably the best advice, because I did. And had difficult campaigns, again, primaries and, debates. And
those are so much harder as a mayor than an alder person, because you've got the whole city now instead of just one ward.
Exactly. And I really knew, even though we're a small town.
Right.
But once you're in an office like mayor, you are part of the public. Your family's part of the public. You're fair game. And I was always a very private person. And I didn't know what that would look like. And sometimes, as it turned out, it was very difficult. Other times, people still stop me and say, hi, you were the mayor. And I'm always like, oh my God, they recognize me. But it's so funny, because of course they do. I mean, they saw your picture all the time.
For 8 years.
For 8 years. So you don't think of that. But the experience was good.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I have so many questions. Or just the things thinking of, going back to the campaigns and such. Who were you running against that first term, that first election?
Man, I hope I remember correctly. I don't. Okay, we had a primary. I have to think. Excuse me. I was running against Tim Schmidt. And I believe that was primary, because he was a Republican as well. And that was very contentious. And so I won that primary. And then I'm not sure who the Democrat was, quite frankly, on the other side. Mm-hmm. But that was debates. And I always said, as anxious or nervous as you would be, you're there, you're doing it because you're running for office, and people don't want to see a nervous Nellie.
Yeah.
That doesn't engender very much confidence.
No.
And so you really sort of put on this mask or a different persona. I always felt who I was as mayor was really not who I totally was as a regular person.
Did you feel like you put on a more rigid...
I just think people always felt, a couple of people said to my daughter, do you think your mother's tough enough to be mayor?
Oh, wow. Okay. Because
I was a very quiet person.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter said, oh, I don't think you know my mother. and so I think people see you being nice and you're being quiet as being weak. And that's not the case at all.
Yeah, you're just thinking, right?
Yeah.
You're being quiet because you're...
And you can be very tough and still be kind.
Yes.
I mean, we don't see that too much today.
Mm-hmm.
But just because you're more of a thoughtful person and you're not nasty to people doesn't mean you're a pushover.
Yeah.
But I don't think you ever have to resort to that.
Yeah. What was going on at the time during that first election? What was going on in Kankakee that was very... I mean, I suppose it hasn't changed too much. It seems like it's always the same things. It's crime, it's economics.
It's crime, it's economics. There weren't any real button issues. just, I think, different perspectives of where the city should go. I'm a very, very conservative as far as financial and fiscal. And so I was very keyed into the city's finances, and, we have to live within our means and things of that nature. People want you to do a lot of things. They never think about how you pay for them. And people will come up to you and say, we should do this, we should do that. And I would say to them, you don't understand. The only money meaning the city, has are tax dollars. We don't sell anything. We don't grow anything. So any money I give out has come from the residents of the city of Kankakee.
It's come from residents, businesses,
exactly,
other government organizations.
Right, federal government,
Yeah.
whatever. But it's still tax money.
Mhm.
It's not, I used to call it like funny money. People think it's like monopoly money, but it's not. And I was very conscious of, I wouldn't do anything with the city financially that I wouldn't have done with my own money. And I think a lot of times that is absolutely the opposite of what people do, because aldermen would want to do things. And I'd say, would you do that with your money?
Mm-hmm.
That risk? Or no. Then why would we do it with the taxpayer money? But it's like it's apples and oranges.
Right. Yeah. Again, everyone has their own opinion.
And maybe they would do it with their own money.
Maybe
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they would. Or maybe,
you don't know.
Yes.
But I took that pretty responsible position. After I was elected, things were good for about 9 months or so.
That's it?
And again, we go back to a spot in time. And the city had done sales tax sharing agreements with lots of businesses that this was their point of sale, mostly internet. And that had been going on for 15 years, maybe. And the city of Chicago said, how come you have all this sales tax money? I mean, they literally had no clue. And then sued us and said, well, that's really our money.
That's right. I remember. This is coming back to me now.
And
yeah.
That really defined almost the rest of my time in office.
Yeah, that was dragged out for a very long time.
They had a lot of deep pockets. We continued our, defending ourselves, actually to the Illinois State Supreme Court, where we won.
Yes, I remember that.
People say it was illegal. I said, no, we won. We were doing everything properly, but the courts, we have to remember we're in a democratic state with a democratic city and a democratic state Supreme Court, said I'm going to call it a rule. The rule that you're following is correct, but there's an implementation to how those rules are implemented. And those are not matching up. So either the rule has to change, the statute, or the implementation. So we said, well, we offered options of how we could make it go so the city could still continue doing the sales tax agreements. And the city of Chicago, the RTA, which was the people who were suing us, had theirs. And of course, those were the ones that were accepted. And so the city had to discontinue those agreements, which, $1.5 million, $2 million a year in revenue.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of money.
For a city
and we
like
had
ours.
to stop doing it from the time we were sued. So for the rest of the time, I escrowed the money we had because that court case went on forever.
Did it end even after you were out of office, or did it end right?
It ended. It was very sad to me. It ended right after I was out of office. And the cases had ended, but the disbursements of the monies we had held for the business partners, the companies, were finally being dispersed to them. And I had kept that money. And so, because it wasn't ours, I don't know what would have happened had we spent it, but I mean, I wasn't going to do that.
That's such a long time.
And so we had to do cuts. You know, we did the vehicle sticker, that horrible thing that no one likes.
Yes, that came back.
But my philosophy was I couldn't put it on the backs of the taxpayers. So anything we added in revenue, like a vehicle sticker, we cut in operations. Because you can't tax your way out of a situation like that, and you really can't cut your way out. And so we did a mix. And I think that was the right thing to do. And when I left office, I had an account that was almost $4 million for the next administration that we had never had. I call it our savings account, that we had managed to squirrel away enough money for a rainy day fund that they hadn't had for years.
What was another thing when you look at your time as mayor that you look back on besides that sales tax fiasco?
Oh, I think we did. You know, I still drive around, and I think that wasn't there. I did that. That's maybe doesn't sound very nice.
Well, you were a part of it.
I was
right?
a part of it.
You were a part of it.
We did
yeah.
Music Fest. We did what Music Fest looks like today.
That's right. That started when you were in office.
That was under my administration. That had never been to the extent. And so I wanted to do something big. And thank goodness with the library, they were a huge part of it. Kudos to Steve Bertrand and Allison Beasley.
Did they come to you with the idea?
We had an employee who was doing, it was called the Mayor's Events or something.
Okay.
And it typically was like a little combo down at the depot, things like that. And I didn't care for that setup. So we created the events partnership with the city, the library, and CDA, KDC, Kankakee Development Corporation.
Okay.
And so that was a partnership to take care of events downtown. And so we did Music Fest. And I'll never forget the first Music Fest with the 3 stages and, you know, all of that. And people coming up to me and saying, I can't believe this is Kankakee. And I said, it is Kankakee. And so I think people forget that we started that. And it was really the start of, we did all the historic signage downtown. We did lights downtown. We did the gas and wash on Court and Washington. We did amazing developments. We did Martin Luther King Jr. Park on the east side of town. We started the Ricky Rockets.
Oh, gosh.
All right.
Yeah, which fine.
Well,
almost 10 years.
Yes, because government works slow.
Yeah,
but
sometimes a little too slow.
Sometimes
right?
a little too slow, but we did the River Station Apartments on Station Street, the senior living high rise. I mean, we did a lot, but, you know, people tend to, and that's the way it is.
Yes.
You forget once you see something done, you forget that it wasn't always here.
Yes, yes. Well, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the things I think of that happened during your time was the Pedway Bridge. Like the plans were put in place, but I remember it wasn't finished until you were out of office, I think.
We saw the last section put in the bridge, and we dedicated it literally like a couple weeks after I was there.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. And so we did that. That was all part of the bicycle path. We had a grant for the river that we took down many houses on River Street from the Washington Avenue Bridge west to start the riverfront development. That Pedway Bridge was all part of it. It connected the trail that goes all the way out to KCC. And like by Perry Farm, you can literally go from KCC all the way to Gar Creek, I think, on the trail. So it just takes time. And, you know, you have to have a vision of what you want to accomplish. I was very goal-oriented. I would keep a list, you know, like what did we do? What have we done this month? Because you have to do things. You have to have an idea of what you want to accomplish other than just the day-to-day stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And we lost, that was the housing bubble. And so we lost a lot of EAV, the worth of your properties in your town, declined by over 30%. That was a huge hit to the city and other municipalities.
Right.
And
well, you were also in office when the recession was going on too, so that was a really tough time
you
to
really
be
had,
in.
and again, every administration has societal things that they deal with. I said to Mayor Curtis, I'm jealous about two things. A, COVID money. I literally would count pennies. And they're doing meetings on how to give away money.
Right?
I still can't wrap my head around that.
It is pretty crazy.
It is crazy. And because your property values, there's a lag, like 3 or 4 year lag. Well, now the property values are high again. Okay, I got out of office and literally they started going up.
Yes.
But that's the
and
country.
Wasn't the property tax rate higher?
It's
too?
higher because your values of your property are lower.
Yeah.
You levy your taxes and that amount is split like a pie.
Yeah.
Well, if your pie has shrunk, everyone pays more. When your pie's real big, everybody pays less.
Way less.
And those were things we had no control over. I mean, that's national. There are just certain things you just have no control over.
Yeah. So, getting to, you actually ran 3 times. Correct?
3 times.
And the
one time too many.
Well, the important thing is that you did what you felt was right for yourself and for the city. You thought you were doing a great job in the city at the time, and you wanted to continue to do that great work for the city that you loved.
No, I felt we had some things that we needed to finish.
Yeah. So, I guess we didn't. I don't know. Do you remember the second race very well? I know that's...
you think at the time you'll never forget any of this.
But then
it's over. It's like childbirth. It's terrible while you're doing it, and then you end up forgetting about it. Mm-hmm. So, no, I'm sorry. I really don't.
Yeah. I'm sure you remember the last one, though.
Yes, I do.
Yes. That was a big one. And, I mean, who would have thought, though, that it would have really come down to 2 women, I mean, it's pretty amazing that you were part of that, because that was, again, like, you were the first woman mayor elected, but then also I'm sure that was the first time in our city's history that it was 2 women against each other.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, you'd never had a woman, period. So you would have never had 2 women.
Yeah.
It was, do you like to lose? No, I hate losing. But when you run for any office, student council in high school, you can win or lose, and you accept what it is. And, I think we had a difficult time convincing our voters that this was an important election. A lot of people get complacent. And I think that was more the case than anything else. Not to put anything against Chastity Wells Armstrong, but I knew the election. I have all the data. It was our voters that didn't come out and vote. And then afterwards are like, oh my God, we didn't realize it was like that important. No, people would stop me.
Really?
Oh gosh. I mean, literally, I hated to leave the house.
So they thought that
people would say to me, "Oh, please run again." Oh, we didn't realize, and you want to bite your tongue. It's like, did you vote?
Yeah. So they just were under the assumption that you had it, and they didn't need to go. And
I think people get complacent the longer you're in office. I think there's a wariness factor.
They just think, oh, she'll get it again.
And Chastity ran a good campaign.
Yes.
And so she had, her people came out and voted, and that's how you win. So I was fine. It was the hardest time, and it's true of any election, you lose in April, you don't leave till May.
Yes.
So you really, that month is very stressful because you're trying to get everything wrapped up, tied up, organized for the next person coming in. And when the next person is an opposing party or, it's
makes
like
it even
with
harder.
Mayor Green, it was a very smooth transition.
From the same party.
From the same party, So that was the worst. That was a very stressful time, not just for me, but for all my department heads, all the people who worked for the city, because when you leave, all your department heads have to turn in resignations because they're your employees. They're at-will employees for that administration. And so not only do you lose, but they can lose their jobs. And because it's up to the new mayor to appoint who he or she wants to have in those positions. So it's a very difficult time for a lot of people.
Looking back at it now, I'm sure you view things differently since some time has gone on, since that final race between you and Chastity Wells Armstrong. What do you look at now in a different lens than you did at that time?
I'm not sure I look at it differently. I've always felt everything happens for a reason. And who thought I would run for mayor? Who thought I would be elected twice? You run again, you lose. It's just life. It's just part of the story. So I don't even dwell on it, quite frankly. My husband and I decided, we still live in Kankakee. We built a home out by Riverside because my husband has some physical challenges. So we built a home there because it's all totally handicapped accessible. I'm not sure we would have done that had I, still been in office because it took a lot of time and effort. So, and we love it there. So, life, I can spend time with my daughter, my granddaughter. I couldn't do that. Every time I'd go there, I'd end up with phone calls and, I couldn't go on Mondays,
Mm-hmm.
So, life just, okay, it's good.
Yeah.
You have to leave sometime.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Is anything, did you think that you were going to win that last election? Did you have a feeling?
I had a feeling I was not going to win because I know the data. And did I have any proof? No. Did I have a gut instinct? Yes. In fact, I knew before that day was over. I literally knew probably by 4:00. And the votes weren't all in. We always get a big push. And I was sort of, okay, let's get it over with.
Mm-hmm.
Let's call, let's concede. And my staff people were saying, no, not yet, not yet. I'm like, why not? It's done. And I'm going to say this, I'm not sure it's true. When I called to congratulate her, I don't think she knew she had won.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because we had a great team with all the votes and knowing what was out there.
And they have obviously had some experience already,
right,
with previous elections, assuming you had some of the same team members.
Oh yeah.
With your election.
You just, I lost a race running for high school student council. And I was probably as upset then as I was losing mayor. So it's fine.
Since you've had the privilege of really seeing the city of Kankakee behind the scenes and really seeing how things work, what is, your advice to not only people that are in those seats now or in the future, or just citizens? What is...
I think the city is very viable, but I think we have lots of issues. And again, everyone has a different perspective. So I always fought for my focus was our people in the city of Kankakee. I'm not going to say care, but when things came up that people wanted to do things in town, if I didn't think it was best for the residents, like I hate gambling, all right? I hated when the state said that in order to open up a gambling facility, you had to have a liquor license because the liquor license is me, the city.
Right, that's the
all
city.
Right?
Yeah.
And I thought, why would you do that? I had people coming to me saying, I want to do a fake bar. And I said, so explain to me what a fake bar is. Well, I want the gambling machines, but I really don't want a bar. So we'll have a counter with like some liquor bottles. We'd serve, but that's not our focus. And I'd say, no. And it was friends. People got angry because there's money to be made in gambling.
Yes, as we all know.
And the city, if you take time and look at the city budget, you will be appalled at how much revenue gambling brings in. And the city gets the smallest portion of anybody. And we're not a wealthy community by any means. And that we have that kind of revenue being generated by gambling is, to me, horrible. So that's a personal.
Yeah, that is a personal thing. But, in that seat, though, so, you're saying you kind of, when that was starting to come up when you were in office, you were saying no instead of.
I was saying no to obvious fake situations.
Mm-hmm.
And we even, you don't have to give a liquor license.
Right.
I just found that to be troubling because, yes, the money's great, but at what expense? You have people who have food pantries, who would go to food pantries, and yet you're grossing more in gambling than many cities in the state of our size. Those two things just didn't work for me. And social service agencies. We have to take care of people. We have a lot of people who need help in our community. And when I say community, I say big C, our community. And I really was disturbed when people wanted to do every social service agency in the city of Kankakee. It's not just our responsibility. And you have to understand that we did a data run on the properties in the city of Kankakee. A third of the properties pay no property taxes.
Because of social services?
You've got several different things. One, you have a lot of very small, this was prior to, I don't know what the property values are now, but very small houses in poor neighborhoods whose value isn't very high. And then you may have a senior citizen living there or someone who's disabled. And by the time you do all of the exemptions that are legal, that you're allowed, you end up exempting that property down to almost nothing, which only means everyone else has to pick up slack. And when you look at every social service agency pays no property taxes because they're nonprofits. You have, all the churches. This is my property tax speech.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people are thinking, oh my God, she's so cruel. No, this is a state issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I really feel strongly because when people talk about the high property taxes in the city of Kankakee, you have to look at the whole picture. And years ago, when churches, hospitals, agencies were tax exempt, a community would have, 3 or 4 churches, a hospital, a Y, maybe the Salvation Army. Now you have hundreds of properties that are tax exempt. It's not sustainable. And so my thought was we need to share our burden with Bradley, Bourbonnais, Mantino, because we all have poor people, we all have homeless people, we all have veterans, we all have everything. And if we all share, then everyone has a proportional piece in there. You can't have one community bear the burden and then say that community isn't as great as it could be because they have high taxes or pick a topic. You can't do that. You have to give us some relief, and you have to be willing to share the burden.
So did you offer any type of proposal or idea for helping? What would be your idea of fixing
I think
that?
we worked well with the other mayors, but, they're all focused on their communities. I mean, some things you can't fix because they're state laws. I mean, I can't tax entities that aren't allowed to be taxed. But I'm just saying outsiders, you said, what do I know being inside?
Yes,
there are a lot of people that outsiders may not, I never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Now I understand. I don't know the answer, but at least now I have a better picture.
You have the knowledge of such things.
Right.
Yeah. What's another thing that you...
I think we have good things. I mean, I think our downtown, again, I'm going to go back to Music Fest when you started to bring people downtown. The library is fabulous. We have beautiful neighborhoods. We have a historic district. We have the river that they're starting to, facilitate some development there. I think we have extraordinary departments. I would put our police department up against any department anywhere. They get lots of exposure to things, but I think they handle it really well. We have to work on poverty. We have to work on jobs. But I remember during the debate, someone said, what's the biggest issue? And of course, people go to jobs. And I say, no, it's education. Because we have jobs, but we don't have enough people who are educated enough to take those jobs. And we've worked with KCC to develop with all of our manufacturing companies, what kind of people do you need? And one of the programs was welding. We need welders. They can start right out of school. KCC developed a welding program. Those people start in the mid-70s for money and get a job the second they're done. But you have to have those skill sets. And so as a community, we have to make sure that the kids who are graduating in our community are well positioned, that they're educated and they have a skill set, whatever that skill set is.
And that they have access to such things too.
Correct.
I mean, that's the other issue with that too.
And I worked at the school district. So I'm aware of a school district. And I think you have to be child-centered and you have to work with the community and the parents. And we have to set a very high standard. And I think as a country, we tend to lower standards. And I can't stand that. I think you're doing such a disservice to your community, to your children, to your businesses. We should have high standards for what our children can accomplish. And that's not college. That can be the trades. It can be, today there are jobs that I don't even know about.
Yes.
You said, what did I go to school for? Well, at that time, you could be a nurse, you could be a teacher, you could be, a handful of things. Now, oh my gosh, there's occupations that I'm not even aware of. You don't need college. Programming. I don't know what coding is. I mean, there's just so many opportunities for kids.
Yes.
And adults. But employers want people who are teachable and people who are trainable and who have social skills. And I think it's really critical.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. Is there anything, I know this is kind of not the first time, but it's first time in a while, I should say, that, you've been a part of some media coverage since that last election. And I didn't know if there's anything that you've thought about that you just want people to know about you or your time, serving the community in office, whether it was as an alderwoman or as a mayor.
No, I think I was very privileged to be the mayor of the city. I just thank everyone, regardless of their affiliation, for giving me that opportunity. It was, people say, oh, it was an honor to serve. It really was an honor to serve. And I had lots of great support. You mentioned it's Women's Month and, the first woman, but that never even entered my mind. It seemed to be more of an issue, a good issue for other people. It never even crossed it honestly didn't cross my mind that I would be the first woman. And when my granddaughter came up to my office for the first time, and when you go upstairs at the administration building, there's all the pictures of all the mayors. And she's like, Nana, you're going to have to be like old and have a beard to be on this wall.
You're going to have to grow a beard.
And I'm like, then it sort of hits you when you see all of these men.
Then you're like, oh my gosh.
It's like, oh yeah.
Do you think it made it harder for you as a woman to take that on that feat?
I never felt, and again, kudos to my department heads and the people I worked with. I never felt anyone was biased against me being a woman, ever. But on the flip side, I was very much aware of it after I got into office. I didn't think much about it during the campaign, that it was very important for me to prove that I was competent. And I go back to reading everything. Because when you're a superintendent or you're a boss in a company, you have credentials. People hire you based on your education, your experience. When you're elected to an office, you don't have any credentials.
No, it's true. I mean, literally anyone can be elected.
Anybody can be elected.
Yes.
And the people who are your department heads are the professionals. All right. And, all I could think of is that, oh my God, I could only imagine what this is going to be like. And so I really felt it was important for them to see that I knew what I was talking about. And I had help. I mean, people give you things to read. How does the police department run? What does our certification look like? You have to know what you're talking about. And that was very time consuming. But I think it helped because I felt I had the support of the department heads in running. I mean, they're my department heads. I mean,
right. You hired them or appointed them.
But you have to hire good people.
Yes. You
competent people
you have
to surround yourself with.
Yes. People that are knowledgeable, that can feed you the information that you need to make decisions.
And that you have trust in.
Yes.
It's very hard to trust people when you're in that office because a lot of people have other ideas and have ulterior motives. So you really have a very small group of people that, at least I did, that I could trust, that would give me the right advice. And then ultimately you have to make the decision because it rests on you. But no, I don't have any. I'm just, again, never thought it would happen.
Yeah. Once it sunk in though, and you're sitting in your office and your granddaughter, right? Mm-hmm. Your granddaughter points out it's all men on the wall. Did you feel an immense pressure realizing that, oh my gosh, I am the first woman?
I think I would have felt that pressure regardless, because you realize at that time, I'm the boss. I've never been a boss, maybe at home.
Well, that counts. That counts, right?
But I felt it was a tremendous responsibility. And I remember sitting at the desk. You talk about, you're in there by yourself for the first day. And I've said this to women that I've spoken to. You really, regardless of what job, it doesn't matter if you're the boss, if you're just an employee, it doesn't matter. You have to say to yourself, what kind of boss or what kind of employee am I going to be? I mean, you have to mentally, I think, say that to yourself. And I cannot tolerate when someone says to me, well, that's not my job. If you're asked to do something, well, that's not my job. I'm like, I remember my husband when he had his practice was very hands-on. He'd change light bulbs. If somebody canceled, he'd be dusting the waiting room. And I remember him saying to one of his employees, your patient canceled, would you straighten up the waiting room and do this and that? And they said, well, that's not my job. And I remember him saying, well, if it's my job, it's your job. So to me, unless it's unethical or immoral, anything an employer says to you, and I've raised my daughter that way, it's part of the job to see that the organization or the company functions.
Well, it's a team effort. Right?
It is a team effort.
Yeah. I think that's really what it comes back to.
And so you really have to focus yourself on, how am I going to do that? How am I going to share that with the department heads? Because you meet with them all the time. And I remember saying to them, my first department head meeting, there's only two things I can't tolerate. I don't want to be lied to, and I don't like surprises. Because you're the first phone call that anybody gets. And so please call me ahead of time if something's going on. And, we aren't dealing with brain surgery. So a mistake, something that happens, we can fix it. We can work around it. But so don't lie about it, because it all comes out anyway. And I don't like to be blindsided about things. So as uncomfortable as it might be to let me know, better I know ahead of time than, because the media. And that was before social media. I got out just in time.
I mean, social media was around, but it's not what it is today.
Not even close.
No.
Of what it is today.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's even enough time, physical time between something happens, that you would have time to know about it before the whole world knows about it.
Yes. Yeah. That has to be I just
think that has to be a terrible challenge.
It
then
is.
you have all of the people with their opinions, and you don't even have time to craft an intelligent. I feel bad when I see, issues happen in communities, our community, and you see the mayor or the police chief or the fire chief, whoever it is, trying to get a handle on something that they don't even know yet what the handle is.
Well, and I think that kind of goes back to, I was having this, it's great you brought this up, because I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this exact situation with social media and the way information gets spread so quickly, whether it's correct or incorrect. And I think that really goes back to, it's more important now than ever for whether it's a business owner, government official, business owner, organization head, whoever it is, to have those personal relationships and be connected, like personally connected, not connected on the internet, but literally like, oh no, I've got their cell phone number. I can just call them. I can just text them. I've got a relationship with that person. So I can, and they know me because I keep a constant open door policy with them.
It's what we felt when I worked at the school district, when we had all of these community outreach, publications and everything, because people developed a trust, because they saw documents relating to the board, and if something was in the newspaper the next day and then they got our thing, well, here's what it says, here's what happened, here was the result of that issue or whatever. So yes, you can't do it once the crisis hits. You're done by that time. And I visited all the companies in town. I went to all of the, business after hours. You're gone every night. Every neighborhood meeting, we had neighborhood groups at I don't know if those are still there, but I would go to all their neighborhood meetings.
Yeah, I think they still do.
Do they still do that?
Yes,
and people would ask me questions, and I would meet once a month with all the leaders of those neighborhood groups would come to City Hall, and we'd have coffee, and I'd have a police chief there. I'd have the code department. I'd have, different people. And my secretary would be writing down, well, here's this issue. We have this alley here, and so they trust you. And a lot of times they have issues that you can't help them with. People would call the city about the parks. Well, that's not us. They would call about the school district. That's not us. But in Chicago, it is. So people, they don't really know the delineation of what government bodies control what.
Which, yeah.
But they're happy to hear. We would transfer them to the right, entity.
Yeah. And it would be especially good if you had a good working relationship with the superintendent of the school district.
Absolutely.
Or, the executive director of the park district.
Absolutely. When we did, I don't know how long you've been here, but we did the Dave Letterman show.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. That was great.
And I worked, the kids came to me and said, we want to do this whole gift for Dave Letterman.
Take down the gazebo.
Take down the gazebo, all of that. Do we have your buy-in? And again, I said, if you're going to do that, then it has to be done at the very highest level. You have to do your homework. You have to know what you're doing. And they were awesome. But I knew the superintendent. We worked together with the kids. That was a huge media thing because it was such a big deal.
It was great. It was such a great way to take something that was a negative thing
and turn it into a positive.
Yes.
And the band was at the Paramount, and I knew the owners of the Paramount, and they were more than happy to open up the theater. But that was a true community effort, and the kids did a great job, but they were held to a standard.
Yes. So if you're listening to this and you have no idea what we're talking about, I'll just give you a Cliff Notes or Spark Notes version. So in the 90s, Dave Letterman from The Late Show, he gifted 2 gazebos to the city of Kankakee because at that time we were
the worst rated something.
Worst rated, I can't remember if it was I think it was in the country, one of the worst rated cities in the entire country. So he, thought, I'll give them a couple gazebos. That'll kind of clean up the place a little bit. So, those gazebos, and one of them is still
Cobb Park.
Cobb Park is still there. But one of them, or the other one, I should say, it was kind of deteriorating a little bit. And this would have been in the 2010s.
My first term. So
yeah,
probably 2010.
It's sometime in the 20-teens, 20. Yeah. And anyway. So a group of Kankakee High School students thought, and this was around the time that Dave Letterman was retiring from his late night show.
Yeah.
So they thought, let's give him the gift. Let's take this gazebo that he gifted us that's rotting away. Let's take what's good and build him a rocking chair and give that to him as a retirement gift. And
they did.
The film crew from his show came out here. They filmed the whole town and showed that, hey, Kankakee is risen or it's rising.
Right.
It's not, And
it was good for the kids to take ownership and be proud. And in deference to that rating, some of the metrics, I feel bad when any community gets hooked on a rating that they had no part in. Some of the metrics wouldn't even apply to a community our size. You don't have a true symphony, or you don't have, those are just things that a small town, but nevertheless, it was, and it was a proud time, but that's what I mean about a collaboration, and everyone has to take ownership because the media descends, and they've descended on us a lot. Whenever I would see the trucks with the big satellite dishes, you always knew it was nothing good. Because they never come when there's something really good.
They do. It's just not as often.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they have their pick and choose.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. I know we could go on forever, but I just want to ask you one last thing, since we are focusing on.
It's late.
It
Time flies.
Time flies. And there's so much to talk about. But with it being Women's History Month, and you are one of the prominent figures now in not just the city's history, but in the county's history as well. You've talked about how you are asked to speak at different events that are geared towards women and things like that. What is the one biggest piece of advice that you offer to women when it comes to?
I really think you have to be competent and knowledgeable. It's the only issue I have with the first. You're the first this, you're the first that. That's great. And someone asked me, a similar question. I said, well, I'd rather be known that I was a competent mayor than I was the first woman mayor. And I understand it breaks a barrier. I get that. But once you get there, once you've broken the barrier, now you really have to produce. And so I say to them, do your homework. At the school district, we had a phrase, lifelong learner. And you say that to the kids, and it's sort of a cliche, you think. It is, but until you're 68 years old and you're reading documents and you think, I am a lifelong learner.
Yep.
We all are. Yeah. And you can't ever stop being a lifelong learner.
No, that's very well said. It's a cliche until you have one of those moments where you're just soaking everything in and you're like, wow, I'm never going to stop learning. I just learned something new now and I'm going to continue learning. And it's just something we have to be conscious of, something we just easily forget and is looked over.
Well, and again, as you age, you really have to stay engaged, because I think it really keeps you sharp.
It does. Yeah. And I can see you're sharp too. So,
so far, so good.
Well, Nina, this has been great.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to get out there before we close out?
No, I just am thankful to the residents of the city. I'm thankful to my family that had enough confidence in me, and who really, I'm not going to say suffered, but who bore the brunt of me being gone all the time, and some of the nasty things that are said. My husband took them far more seriously than I did.
You have a thicker skin.
Well, you know what? You can't. You only have so much energy, so you just really can't focus on that. But I'm grateful to the residents those who voted and those who didn't, but just giving me the opportunity. It was amazing.
Okay. Thank you, Nina, again.
You're welcome.
That concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Kankakee Podcast. Shout out to Teague Dreenan for supporting the show each month through Patreon. If you want your name announced on a future episode, you can sign up at patreon.com/Kankakee Podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors, Chicago Dough Company, Noble Dairy Queen Stores, Frank's Appliance Center and Sleep Source, King Music, Little Me Studio, D. Westfall Jewelers, and Edward Jones Financial Advisor Adam Elroy. Kankakee Podcast is produced by the fine team at Pathfinder, a full-service marketing agency in downtown Kankakee. You can learn more at yourpathfinder.io. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.